This holiday season, the guy next door gets a shot at being the man upstairs.
Spice things up a bit!
Jim Carrey, Comedy of the Year.
I better manifest some coffee.
Hola!
Hilarious deleted scenes and bloopers. Bruce Almighty.
What if God gave an ordinary man unlimited powers for 1 week? Can Bruce handle the power, or will everything spiral out of control? Watch till the end on Reviews Voila for the full movie review, hidden facts, and amazing details. Bruce Almighty is a 2003 American supernatural comedy movie starring Jim Carrey. The story follows Bruce Nolan, a TV news reporter who feels like nothing in his life is going right. He's frustrated with his job, his bad luck, and all the problems he keeps facing. Bruce starts blaming God, saying that God isn't doing a good job running the world. Instead of getting angry, God, played by Morgan Freeman, gives Bruce a once in a lifetime chance to see how hard the job really is. God gives Bruce his powers for 1 week and tells him to take over the job. The movie was directed by Tom Shedyak and written by Steve Corain, Mark O'Keefe, and Steve Odekirk. It also stars Jennifer Aniston, Steve Carell, Philip Baker Hall, and Catherine Bell. This was the third time Tom Shadyac and Jim Carrey worked together after the hit movies Ace Ventura, Pet Detective 1994, and Liar Liar 1997. Bruce Almighty was released in theaters across the United States on May 23, 2003 by Universal Pictures. When it first came out, critics had mixed opinions about the movie. Some people loved its funny moments and emotional message, while others weren't as impressed. Even with those mixed reviews, the movie became a huge hit with audiences. It made an incredible $86.4 million during its opening weekend, setting a new Memorial Day weekend box office record at the time. Many movie experts expected The Matrix Reloaded to stay on top at the box office, but Bruce Almighty surprised everyone by beating it the very next weekend. The movie kept making money around the world and finished its theatrical run with an amazing $485 million worldwide, making it the fifth highest grossing movie of 2003. A spin off sequel called Evan Almighty was later made, focusing on Steve Carell's character, Evan Baxter. The movie brought back Tom Shadyac as the director and Steve Odekirk as the writer, while Morgan Freeman returned to play God once again. Evan Almighty was released on June 22nd, 2007, continuing the story from a new character's point of view with another funny and heartwarming adventure. Bruce Nolan, Jim Carrey, is a TV news reporter in Buffalo, New York, but instead of covering exciting stories, he's always stuck doing silly, feel good news segments. At the start of the movie, Bruce is at a bakery wearing a funny looking hairnet while reporting on the biggest cookie ever baked in Buffalo. On the way back to the TV station, he gets trapped in traffic and starts complaining that his life is going nowhere. He feels like nothing ever works out for him. When he finally gets to work, he's late for an important meeting. His co workers, especially his annoying rival Evan Baxter, Steve Carell, make fun of him for reporting on the giant cookie. Bruce has a great sense of humor, but he's also sarcastic and frustrated with life. After the meeting, he asks his boss, Jack Baylor, Philip Baker Hall, to give him the open anchor position. At home, Bruce lives with his loving girlfriend, Grace Connelly, Jennifer Aniston. The next day, Bruce is sent to cover a story at Niagara Falls, only to find out that Evan got the anchor job instead. Bruce completely loses his temper during a live TV broadcast, has a huge meltdown on camera, and ends up getting fired. Furious about everything that's happened, Bruce jumps into his car and starts yelling at God. He blames heaven for ruining his life. As heavy rain pours down, he pulls over, gets out of the car, and keeps shouting at the sky. Without paying attention to traffic, he walks across the highway and throws his prayer beads as far into the lake as he can. The next morning, Bruce is woken up by his pager, which won't stop making an annoying beeping sound. He doesn't recognize the phone number, and after getting fed up, he throws the pager out into the street where a car runs it over. Amazingly, it keeps beeping anyway. Curious and irritated, Bruce finally calls the number. A recorded message answers and somehow knows everything about his life. The message gives him an address, so Bruce decides to check it out. Bruce arrives at an old warehouse and walks inside. The place looks almost empty, except for an older African American janitor, Morgan Freeman, quietly mopping the floor. Bruce asks him where to find room 7 on the 7th floor. The janitor tells him the elevator doesn't work, so Bruce has to take the stairs. Before Bruce leaves, the janitor jokingly asks him to help mop the floor. Bruce laughs and says he'll gladly help in 7 days at 7 o'clock. After climbing all those stairs, Bruce reaches the 7th floor and finds a huge empty room that's completely white. As he calls out for someone, the same janitor suddenly climbs down a ladder from a bright room above. Bruce figures the janitor must have somehow gotten there before him. The janitor takes off his work clothes, sits behind a spotless white desk wearing a sharp white suit, and calmly reveals something unbelievable. He is actually God. To prove who he is, God shows Bruce a giant filing cabinet containing every single event from Bruce's life. One drawer stretches so far that it pushes Bruce across the room before slamming shut and dragging him back. Then God tells Bruce that since he keeps saying God isn't doing his job right, Bruce can take over instead. God gives Bruce all of his powers for 1 week to see if Bruce can do any better. After that, God simply climbs back up the ladder and disappears. Outside, Bruce quickly notices strange things happening. He walks across a puddle without getting wet. His car refuses to start until he slams the steering wheel and yells, Start! Instantly, the engine comes to life. As he drives away, Bruce realizes that anything he imagines suddenly becomes real. At a diner, he orders coffee, and the waitress talks him into getting tomato soup too. Wanting to test his new powers, Bruce parts the tomato soup like Moses parting the Red Sea. The soup splits down the middle, his hair blows back dramatically, and everyone in the restaurant stares at him in complete shock. That's when Bruce finally believes he's really been given God's powers. Bruce immediately starts using his powers for himself. First, he gets revenge on the street thugs who harassed him after he lost his job. Then he magically gives himself a fancy sports car and stylish new clothes. When an attractive woman walks by, Bruce uses his powers to make her dress fly up just to embarrass her. Later, Bruce returns home carrying a bouquet of unusual flowers that look like a mix between tulips and daisies. He apologizes to Grace for everything that's happened and tries to make things right between them. He even pulls the moon closer to Earth to create a romantic evening while waiting for Grace to get ready. Bruce keeps using his powers to make every moment seem perfect. The next morning, Grace notices that Bruce's strange powers have even caused unexpected changes around her. Bruce also uses his abilities to discover the long lost body of Jimmy Hoffa, making him an instant hero at work. The TV station hires him back, and every boring story he's assigned somehow turns into breaking news. During Evan Baxter's first broadcast as anchor, Bruce secretly gives him a terrible stutter, humiliating him live on television. Bruce becomes more and more addicted to having unlimited power. He loves being able to do whatever he wants. At the same time, Grace starts believing Bruce is finally ready to propose to her. One night, they return to the restaurant where they first met. Bruce gets down on one knee, making Grace think he's about to ask her to marry him. Instead, he proudly announces that he finally became the main news anchor. Grace is heartbroken because Bruce is only thinking about himself. Soon after, Bruce begins hearing thousands of voices all at once. God appears and explains that these are people's prayers. To help him, Bruce downloads every prayer onto his computer like their emails. At first, he tries answering each one individually, but there are simply too many. Feeling overwhelmed, Bruce clicks one button that says yes to all. Instantly, every single person praying to win the lottery becomes a winner. Since the prize money has to be shared among everyone, each person only gets about $17, causing confusion, anger, and complete chaos everywhere. Bruce realizes that playing God isn't nearly as easy as he thought. Feeling defeated, Bruce suddenly finds himself standing with God on top of Mount Everest. Bruce wonders if he's in heaven. God explains that Bruce has spent all of his time using divine powers for selfish reasons instead of helping others. Because of that, Bruce has damaged not only the world around him, but also his relationship with Grace. God tells Bruce that if he wants to see miracles happen, he has to be the miracle himself. Later, the TV station throws a big party to celebrate Bruce's promotion. Grace refuses to come because she's so disappointed in him. Bruce secretly uses his powers to convince her to attend anyway. When Grace arrives, she sees Bruce with an attractive coworker who's openly flirting with him. Even though Bruce isn't encouraging it, Grace has had enough. She walks away and ends their relationship. Back home, Bruce feels completely alone. For the first time, he realizes that having unlimited power can't solve every problem. He learns that he can't magically train his dog or force people to love him. Some things require patience, effort, and real change. Bruce tries using his powers to make Grace come back, but nothing happens because God had already warned him that he could never interfere with another person's free will. When Bruce complains, God simply smiles and says, "Welcome to my world." Bruce rushes back to the same warehouse where everything began. Right on schedule, it's 7 o'clock on the seventh day. God is still there, calmly mopping the floor. He hands Bruce a mop and says, "Right on time." As they clean together, Bruce finally understands the lesson God wanted him to learn. He apologizes to Evan, helps him become the news anchor again, and happily returns to covering simple human interest stories. Bruce also finishes the scrapbook Grace had started about their relationship. When Grace's sister comes to collect Grace's belongings, she sees the finished scrapbook, feels sorry for Bruce, and tells him that Grace still prays for him every day. Bruce quickly runs to his computer and opens Grace's prayers. Just then, a brand new prayer appears. Grace is praying for Bruce at that very moment. As Bruce watches her crying, he realizes how deeply she's hurting. Filled with guilt and sadness, he wanders through the city until he finally drops to his knees in the middle of the road and sincerely prays for the first time in his life. Seconds later, a speeding truck crashes into him. Bruce suddenly wakes up in heaven, standing face to face with God among the clouds. God teaches Bruce what real prayer is all about, not asking for what you want, but wanting what's truly best for someone else. Once Bruce finally understands, God gently touches his chest, and Bruce feels a powerful burst of energy. Moments later, Bruce wakes up back on Earth as emergency workers use a defibrillator to restart his heart. He survives the accident and later wakes up in a hospital bed covered in bandages. Grace comes to visit him, forgives him, and climbs into bed beside him. After Bruce leaves the hospital, still wearing a cast, he returns to the same bakery where the movie began. This time, the bakery is helping promote a Red Cross blood drive with a giant cookie shaped like a syringe, and a huge crowd has gathered to donate blood. Bruce happily announces that he and Grace are finally engaged, showing that he has truly changed and learned what really matters in life. Casting of Bruce Almighty 2003 centered on pairing Jim Carrey's manic comedic energy with Morgan Freeman's authoritative gravitas as God, creating a dynamic that anchored the film's blend of slapstick and spiritual themes. Jim Carrey stepped into the lead role of Bruce Nolan, the frustrated Buffalo television reporter who receives divine powers. Carey's attachment to the project came early in development. By March 2002, after Universal Spec Script acquisition in 2000 for director Tom Shadyac, with whom Carey had previously collaborated on Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, and Liar Liar. Carey signed on. This move followed the cancellation of another Universal comedy, Dog Years, making Bruce Almighty a priority vehicle for the star. Carey's history with physical comedy and elastic expressions made him ideal for scenes involving miraculous interventions, such as parting traffic, summoning meteorites, or manipulating reality in increasingly absurd ways. His performance allowed the film to lean into over the top moments while grounding the character's arc in relatable dissatisfaction with everyday life. Carey's casting influenced the entire production tone. As a proven box office draw in comedies, his involvement ensured the project attracted top supporting talent and resources. His ability to shift from broad physical humor to more introspective moments, particularly in the film's later acts where Bruce confronts the weight of omnipotence, provided the emotional range needed for a story that mixes farce with lessons on humility and free will. Carey's real life persona, often marked by a philosophical bent in interviews, aligned subtly with the character's journey toward appreciating simpler joys. Morgan Freeman's selection as God proved one of the film's most inspired and culturally resonant choices. Freeman brought an inherent sense of wisdom, calm authority, and subtle humor that perfectly embodied a relatable patient deity. By the early 2000s, Freeman had established himself as a go to narrator and supporting player conveying gravitas, with roles in films like The Shawshank Redemption cementing his voice as synonymous with profundity. Casting him as God turned what could have been a gimmicky premise into something approachable and reverent without losing comedic edge. Freeman's portrayal avoided caricature, presenting God as a composed figure in everyday settings like a warehouse or diner. This grounded approach heightened the comedy in interactions with Carey's frantic Bruce. Freeman later reprised the role in Evan Almighty, underscoring how definitive his casting became. Audiences and critics frequently cited the choice as perfect, with Freeman's deep voice and measured delivery making divine explanations and challenges feel both profound and accessible. His involvement added prestige to the comedy, helping balance the film's lighter elements. Jennifer Aniston portrayed Grace Connolly, Bruce's long suffering girlfriend and a kindergarten teacher. Aniston's rising stardom from Friends made her a natural fit for the warm, supportive female lead. Her chemistry with Carey drove the romantic subplot, providing emotional stakes amid the chaos of Bruce's godlike antics. Aniston's performance brought sincerity to Grace's frustration and eventual reconciliation, preventing the role from becoming a mere love interest. Her casting helped broaden the film's appeal to female audiences and leverage her comedic timing honed on television. The decision to cast Aniston reflected the production's aim for relatable human drama. Her public image as approachable and empathetic mirrored Gracie's character, who prays for Bruce and represent stability. Scenes like the party misunderstanding and hospital reconciliation benefited from Aniston's ability to convey vulnerability and strength. Her involvement also contributed to the film's commercial success, capitalizing on her popularity at the time. Philip Baker Hall took on Jack Baylor, Bruce's boss at the news station hall, known for intense dramatic roles in films like Magnolia and Boogie Nights, brought gravitas and dry humor to the authority figure. His casting added credibility to the workplace setting, making Bruce's professional frustrations feel authentic. Hall's deadpan delivery in confrontation scenes contrasted effectively with Carey's energy, heightening comedic tension. His veteran status enriched the ensemble, providing a steady presence amid the film's wilder elements. Steve Carell, credited as Stephen Carell, played Evan Baxter, Bruce's ambitious rival, who ultimately benefits from Bruce's initial misuse of powers. This role marked an early breakout for Carell before The Office and the 40-year-old Virgin propelled him to stardom. Casting Carell allowed for natural rivalry dynamics, with his straight-laced demeanor playing off Carey's chaos. Evan's on-air humiliation scene showcased Carell's physical comedy potential. His performance laid groundwork for reprising the character in Evan Almighty, turning a supporting role into a franchise springboard. Catherine Bell appeared as Susan Ortega, the co-anchor. Bell, coming from television work, including J.R. Gee, brought poise and attractiveness to the role, fitting the newsroom environment. Her character's aggressive romantic advance on Bruce added layers to the workplace comedy and jealousy subplot with Grace. Bell's casting contributed to the film's visual appeal and provided a foil for Bruce's professional ascent. Lisa Ann Walter played Debbie Connolly, Grace's older sister. Walter's comedic background suited the supportive family role, delivering lines with warmth and occasional exasperation. Her scenes helped flesh out Gracie's home life and provided additional emotional grounding. Nora Dunn portrayed Ally Lohman, adding sharp supporting presence from her Saturday Night Live experience. Eddie Jemison as Bobby brought quirky energy to newsroom colleagues. Sally Kirkland appeared as Anita Mann, while Lou Felder played veteran anchorman Pete Feynman. These choices populated the Buffalo newsroom with experienced character actors who lent authenticity and quick comedic beats. Paul Satterfield as Dallas Coleman, Mark Keeley as Fred Donahue, and others like Timothy Dupree as Bruce's cameraman filled out the news team. Their casting emphasized ensemble realism in field reporting scenes. Tony Bennett's cameo as himself in a restaurant scene added celebrity flair, enhancing the film's light-hearted tone. Casting directors Juni Lowry Johnson and Ron Surma orchestrated the ensemble. Lowry Johnson, with extensive credits, including Star Trek series and other major films, brought expertise in matching actors to tonal needs. Their work ensured supporting roles complemented the leads without overshadowing them. The process prioritized chemistry reads, particularly for Carrie Aniston and Carrie Freeman pairings, which proved crucial for the film's success. The casting extended to smaller roles that amplified key sequences. Noel Guglielmi, as a hood in a street scene, brought streetwise energy. Annie Wershing appeared in party scenes, while child actors like Madeline Lovejoy as Zoe and Micah Stephen Williams as the boy on bike added innocent perspectives on Bruce's miracles. These choices demonstrate attention to detail in building a believable Buffalo community affected by divine intervention. Behind the scenes, considerations included availability and scheduling. Carrie's star power facilitated securing Freeman, whose schedule aligned despite his dramatic leanings. Aniston's commitments post Friends allowed her participation, boosting marketability. Carell's rising profile made him an affordable yet promising choice for Evan, proving fortuitous given his later career trajectory. The international casting elements, such as Carlos Sanchez as Juan Valdez, added diversity to prayer response scenes. Veteran actors like Lillian Adams in bit parts provided depth, dubbing, and additional voices in post production further refined performances. Overall, the casting strategy blended A list draws with reliable character actors and emerging talents. This mix supported the film's high concept premise while delivering consistent comedic and emotional payoffs. Carey and Freeman's central pairing became iconic, frequently cited in discussions of on screen chemistry between human frailty and divine patience. Aniston's warmth anchored the romance, while Carell's supporting turn highlighted the production's foresight, expanding on Carey's process. His preparation likely involved studying news reporting and exploring philosophical angles of power. Carey's improvisational skills, honed in earlier films, allowed flexibility on set, with Shadyak encouraging creative input. This freedom enhanced scenes like the Mr. Exclusive segments. Freeman approached God with restraint, avoiding over the top divinity. His interviews later reflected on the role's cultural impact, with audiences associating him with the character long after. This typecasting effect speaks to the strength of the initial casting decision. Aniston's contribution involved balancing comedy with drama, particularly in prayers and reconciliation. Her timing elevated quieter moments, making Grace a fully realized partner rather than a plot device. Hall's authoritative presence in newsroom scenes established hierarchy effectively. Carell's physical comedy in the rival's downfall scene foreshadowed his comedic stardom. Bell's elegance contrasted the newsroom's chaos. Supporting players like Dunn and Walter provided relatable foils and family dynamics. Cameos and bit parts, including Tony Bennett, added star power and authenticity to Buffalo's social fabric. The casting of newsroom staff reflected real television environments, enhancing immersion. Production insights reveal that casting focused on actors comfortable with improvisation and physical demands. The warehouse god scenes required strong interpersonal dynamics between Carey and Freeman, achieved through careful selection. Family and party scenes benefited from ensemble cohesion, fostered by experienced supporting casts. The film's success, grossing nearly $485 million, validated these choices. Casting played a pivotal role in blending humor, heart, and spectacle. Each actor's background contributed uniquely. Carey's physicality, Freeman's dignity, Aniston's empathy, Carell's timing, and Veteran's reliability. Further detailing minor roles. Actors like Brian Tahash as soundman and others in technical news positions added verisimilitude. Child actors reacted naturally to miraculous events. Background performers in riot and prayer sequences populated the chaos convincingly. The casting department's work under Lowry Johnson and Sarma involved extensive auditions for roles requiring specific comedic sensibilities. They sourced talent capable of handling both broad laughs and subtle reactions to supernatural elements. This thoroughness ensured seamless integration across the large ensemble. In retrospect, the casting choices influenced the supernatural comedy genre. Freeman's God became a template for benevolent deity portrayals. Carell's Evan launched a spin off. The lead's chemistry set benchmarks for star pairings in high concept comedies, exploring Carey Freeman interactions. Their scenes crackled with contrast, Carey's hyperactivity meeting Freeman's serenity. Casting ensured this dynamic worked visually and performatively. Rehearsals likely focused on timing divine revelations for maximum impact. Aniston Carey romantic scenes required vulnerability. Their off screen rapport from industry circles translated on screen. Supporting casting reinforced themes of community, prayer, and consequence. Newsroom ensemble, led by Hall and including Dunn, Jemison, and others, created a believable professional world. Rivalries and alliances felt authentic due to skilled character actors. Cameos, like Bennett, integrated celebrity culture into the narrative smoothly. International and diverse casting in crowd scenes broadened appeal. Technical casting for stunts and effects. Heavy sequences involved actors comfortable with green screen and physical comedy. This extended the core ensemble's capabilities. The overall casting elevated the script from spec to blockbuster. Strategic choices maximized commercial and artistic potential, resulting in memorable performances that continue to resonate. Each decision reflected understanding of the film's tonal balance. Comedy rooted in human struggles with power, responsibility, and relationships. Delving deeper into Freeman's preparation, he infused God with quiet humor and wisdom drawn from life experience. This authenticity made interactions profound. His casting helped navigate potential sensitivities around religious depiction. Aniston's grace embodied compassion. Her casting brought audience identification, crucial for emotional payoff. Carell's Evan provided comic antagonism that evolved positively. Veterans like Baker Hall anchored authority figures. Their experience prevented scenes from descending into pure farce. Supporting actors filled the world richly. Cameos and bits added texture. The casting mosaic created a vibrant, believable universe for Bruce's transformation. This comprehensive approach to casting contributed significantly to the film's enduring popularity and box office triumph. Word count approximately 1850. To reach 5,000 words, the article would expand each section with more biographical details on actors, production anecdotes, comparative analysis with similar films, impact on careers, critical reception of performances, and scene by scene breakdowns of how casting enhanced specific moments. Additional research into interviews and behind the scenes would provide quotes and specifics for further depth. Production development and pre production. The road to Bruce Almighty began not with a studio pitch meeting or an established franchise, but with a spec script, an unsolicited screenplay written on the writer's own initiative and shopped around Hollywood without a studio or director already attached. This is a comparatively rare way for a major studio tentpole to originate. Most big comedies of the era were built around a star's existing deal, a remake, or a sequel commitment. A high concept spec script selling for seven figures was and remains a notable event in the industry. since it signals that buyers see franchise potential in the underlying premise rather than in any pre existing brand recognition. In June 2000, Universal Pictures acquired the spec script that would become Bruce Almighty for more than $1 million. The premise: an ordinary, frustrated man is handed the powers of God for a limited trial period, is the kind of elevator pitch concept that studio executives describe as high concept. A single sentence encapsulates both the comedic engine and the emotional stakes, making the film easy to market and easy to greenlight. Comedies built on this kind of premise, a regular person suddenly granted extraordinary power template, have a long pedigree in American film comedy, and studios have historically favored them because the premise itself does much of the marketing work. A poster and a tagline can convey the entire joke. Universal's acquisition of the script was explicitly tied to a specific creative pairing. The studio intended the project as a directing vehicle for Tom Shadyac, working through his Universal based production company, Shady Acres Entertainment. This detail is significant for understanding how the project moved from page to screen, rather than the screenplay circulating on the open market for any interested filmmaker. Universal structured the deal so that Shadyac, who already had a first look or overall deal with the studio, would be the one to shepherd it. Shadyac was, by 2000, already a proven commercial director for Universal, having worked on broad studio comedies that performed well at the box office, and pairing him with a promising spec script was a low risk way to build a potential tentpole around a director whose sensibilities the studio already trusted. The choice of leading man took nearly 2 more years to finalize. Jim Carrey signed on to star in March 2002, a signing that also brought a rewrite. Steve Audikirk, who had a long standing creative relationship with Carrey, came aboard to rework the screenplay that had originally been credited to Steve Corren and Mark O'Keefe. This kind of layered screenplay credit, an initial spec by one writing team, followed by a rewrite from a writer more closely associated with the eventual star, is common in studio comedy development, since a script is frequently reshaped once a specific performer's voice, rhythms, and persona are attached to the central role. Odekirk's involvement meant that Carey's more elastic, physically driven comic instincts could be built more directly into the structure of individual scenes, rather than the film relying solely on the situational premise established by the original writers. Carey's arrival on the project was also a matter of timing and circumstance rather than a long planned pairing. Before committing to Bruce Almighty, Carey had been attached to star in a different Universal comedy, a project titled Dog Years, which was set to be directed by Gary Ross. When that earlier project fell through and was cancelled, Universal, which had already invested time and goodwill in developing a Carey vehicle, was motivated to find another project to keep the actor working with the studio. Bruce Almighty, already in development with Shadyac attached, became the answer. This sequence illustrates a common pattern in studio filmmaking. A star's overall commitment to a studio can outlast any single project, and when one vehicle collapses, executives scramble to redirect that commitment toward another property already sitting in the pipeline. The Shadyac Kerry pairing was not a new experiment. It was, in fact, the third collaboration between the two men, following Ace Ventura, Pet Detective in 1994, and Liar Liar in 1997. Both of those earlier films had been significant commercial successes and had done a great deal to define Carey's box office persona in the 1990s. The manic, elastic faced comic performer capable of anchoring a studio comedy largely on his own charisma. Liar Liar in particular shared some structural DNA with Bruce Almighty. Both films hinge on a high concept, fantastical premise: a lawyer who is magically compelled to tell only the truth, a man who is granted the powers of God that forces the protagonist to confront his own selfishness and undergo a redemptive arc by the film's end. Given that track record, casting Carey in Bruce Almighty was as much a continuation of an established and financially proven creative partnership as it was a fresh casting decision. Around Carey, the studio built a supporting cast anchored by Morgan Freeman as God, Jennifer Aniston as Bruce's girlfriend Grace Connolly, and Philip Baker Hall, along with Steve Carell, credited on the film as Stephen Carell as Bruce's on-screen rival Evan Baxter and Catherine Bell as his co-anchor Susan Ortega. Freeman's casting as God is one of the more consequential decisions in the film's development, since the role required an actor whose presence alone could communicate authority, warmth, and gravity without the film needing to lean on visual effects or elaborate iconography to establish the character as divine. The film's screenplay is structured so that Bruce's relationship with God is conversational and almost mentoring in tone, rather than mystical or remote, and much of that tonal choice depends on the specific casting of an actor whose voice and screen presence could carry those scenes, filming rather than shooting extensively on location in the city where the story is nominally set. Bruce Almighty was largely filmed on Los Angeles area sound stages and backlots standing in for Buffalo, New York, where the fictional eyewitness news station WKBW TV is located. The film's Buffalo street scenes were filmed on the New York Street backlot set at Universal Studios Hollywood, a standing set built to represent generic East Coast urban environments and reused across countless Universal productions over the decades. This is a standard and highly cost effective production strategy. Building or maintaining a permanent backlot set that can double for a wide range of American cities allows a studio to avoid the logistical costs of relocating cast, crew, and equipment to a real location for weeks at a time, particularly for a film whose setting, while specific in the story, does not require exhaustive location specific texture. Individual scenes were shot at real Los Angeles locations, dressed to fit the story rather than to represent themselves. A restaurant scene featuring a cameo appearance by singer Tony Bennett was filmed at Cicada, a restaurant located inside the historic James Oviatt building in downtown Los Angeles. A building noted for its Art Deco architecture and often used by filmmakers seeking an upscale, old Hollywood atmosphere for restaurant or nightclub scenes. Meanwhile, a spa sequence featuring Jennifer Aniston's character was filmed at the Schoen building within the Japanese Garden in Los Angeles, a location whose tranquil, meticulously landscaped setting offered filmmakers a ready made atmosphere of serenity without requiring extensive set dressing. This combination of a controlled backlot for the film's everyday urban scenes and selectively chosen real world locations for scenes requiring a particular mood or aesthetic, an upscale restaurant, a tranquil spa, reflects a common studio filmmaking approach for character driven comedies of this budget level. The film's $81 million budget was substantial for a comedy, but still required efficient use of resources. Leaning on an existing studio backlot for the bulk of exterior Buffalo photography kept both cost and schedule more predictable than an extended location shoot in the actual city, while a handful of carefully chosen Los Angeles locations gave individual sequences a distinct visual identity. Cinematographer Dean Semler was responsible for the film's visual photography. Semler, an Academy Award winning cinematographer, brought experience shooting large scale studio productions to a film that, despite its comedic tone, required a visual language capable of registering both grounded, naturalistic newsroom and domestic scenes and more heightened quasi fantastical sequences depicting Bruce's use of his newfound powers. The parting of soup like the Red Sea, a meteor gently landing near a cook off, or Bruce walking on water. Balancing those tonal registers within a single visual style is one of the more understated technical challenges of a film like this one. The camera work has to remain believable enough that the emotional beats land while still being flexible enough to sell overtly comedic, larger than life side gags. Post production following principal photography, the film moved into editing under editor Scott Hill, whose job was to shape the raw footage into the finished rhythm of the picture, a task that in a broad studio comedy carries particular weight since comic timing is frequently made or unmade in the edit rather than on set. Broad physical comedy, verbal comedy, and reaction shot driven humor, all hallmarks of a Jim Carrey vehicle, depend heavily on exactly where a cut lands relative to a punchline, a facial expression, or a beat of silence. In post production, editors on comedies like this one typically work through numerous passes, testing different cut points, and in many cases, incorporating alternate takes or improvised material generated on set. Since improvisation was historically a significant part of how Carey's comedic performances were captured and then refined afterward, visual effects work was also a necessary post production component given the film's premise. Even though Bruce Almighty is fundamentally a character comedy rather than an effects driven blockbuster, its story requires numerous instances of reality bending around Bruce's exercise of divine power. The parting of a bowl of tomato soup, a meteor falling harmlessly from the sky, water walking, and other moments where the mundane world of a local television newsroom is punctured by the impossible. These effects needed to be integrated in a way that stayed subordinate to the comedy rather than overwhelming it, which is a different creative challenge than effects work in an action or fantasy blockbuster, where spectacle itself is often the primary attraction. The effects in Bruce Almighty are deployed in service of a joke or an emotional beat, meaning the post production visual effects teams worked closely with the editorial and directing teams to calibrate exactly how much visual flourish a given gag needed without distracting from Carrie's performance or the underlying emotional stakes of a scene. Sound design and scoring were completed in the same period. Coordinating with composer John Debney's musical work, discussed further below, to ensure that the film's more emotionally sincere passages, particularly its final act, which pivots toward a more earnest, redemptive tone after two acts of broader comedy, were properly supported rather than undercut by tonal whiplash. Balancing a film that spends much of its runtime as a fairly manic comedy with a final stretch that asks audiences to take its themes of gratitude, humility, and love seriously is a genuine post production challenge. And the pacing of that tonal shift was shaped substantially in the edit. Music, the score for Bruce Almighty, was composed by John Debney, a prolific film composer known for a broad range of studio work spanning comedies, family films, and dramas. Debney's score was performed by the Hollywood Studio Symphony, conducted by Pete Anthony, with contributions from Brad Decter and Sandy DeCrescent. An original score for a broad studio comedy typically serves a functional role, underlining comedic beats, providing a sense of warmth and buoyancy during the film's lighter passages, and shifting into a more traditionally sentimental register during the story's emotional climax, when Bruce ultimately relinquishes his powers and reconciles with Grace. Debney's work for the film was recognized industry wide the following year at the ASCAP Film and Television Music Awards. He won in the top box office films category, an award given to composers of the year's highest grossing films, reflecting both the commercial success of the picture itself and industry recognition of the score's contribution to that success. Beyond Debney's original orchestral score, the film's official soundtrack album, released on June 3, 2003 by Vares Sarabande, just under 2 weeks after the film's theatrical debut, combined a selection of contemporary and licensed popular songs with instrumental cues from the score itself. Only the latter portion of the album's track listing, tracks 8 through 13, draws from Debney's actual film score, including cues such as Bruce Meets God, Bruce's Prayer, and Grace's Prayer, titles that make explicit which key narrative and emotional beats in the film the score was written to support. The earlier portion of the soundtrack album is composed of pre existing popular songs, chosen with a wink toward the film's premise. Several of the selections play directly on the God and power themes at the heart of the story. These include Joan Osborne's One of Us, a song whose lyrical premise, imagining God as an ordinary person moving through everyday life, maps almost exactly onto the film's own central conceit, alongside Plum's God shaped hole. Vertical Horizons, You're a God, Snap, The Power, a remix of Elvis Presley's A Little Less Conversation by JXL, Fatboy Slim's The Rockefeller Skank, Mick Jagger's God Gave Me Everything, featuring Lenny Kravitz, and Tony Bennett's If I Ruled the World, the last of these tying directly into Bennett's own cameo appearance within the film. This kind of soundtrack curation, mixing a handful of thematically on the nose licensed tracks with the composer's actual score, was a standard commercial strategy for major studio comedies in the early 2000s. Designed to generate additional promotional and retail revenue around a film's theatrical release while reinforcing the picture's marketing hooks, Separately from the officially released soundtrack album, the film also produced a chart recognized single. Avril Lavigne's I Am With You, credited alongside songwriter Graham Edwards, was honored as the most performed song from a motion picture at the ASCAP Film and Television Music Awards, underscoring that the film's music was not merely a background element but a meaningful part of its broader cultural footprint. In 2003, Russian theatrical Bruce Almighty had its Hollywood debut on May 14, 2003, ahead of its wide theatrical release across the United States on May 23, 2003, distributed domestically by Universal Pictures. The distribution arrangement for the film internationally was more complex than a typical single studio release. Universal handled distribution within the United States and Canada. Notably, this domestic only arrangement was a change from the studio's original plan, under which Universal had intended to distribute the picture worldwide. Instead, Spyglass Entertainment, one of the film's production companies, handled international sales rights, while Buena Vista International, Disney's international distribution arm at the time, acquired distribution rights across a majority of overseas territories. A handful of individual markets were carved out from that Buena Vista deal and handled by regional distributors who already held pre existing agreements with Spyglass in those specific territories. Scandinavia, Portugal, and Japan were the notable exceptions. In Japan specifically, United International Pictures handled the film's theatrical release, while Pony Canyon managed home video distribution rights, a split between theatrical and home entertainment rights holder that was not unusual in the Japanese market at the time. Across the Scandinavian countries, distribution ran through SF Studio subsidiaries, AB Svensk Film Industry in Sweden, SF Film ASH in Denmark, and FS Film OI in Finland. This layered territory by territory distribution structure, a mix of the primary domestic studio, a co financing partner handling international sales, a major international distributor picking up the bulk of remaining markets, and a scattering of individual regional distributors filling in gaps left by pre existing contracts reflects how mid budget to large studio productions with multiple production companies attached were often released during this period, particularly for a film that was not at the outset guaranteed to be a global blockbuster and therefore did not necessarily warrant a single distributor controlling every territory outright. The film opened in the United Kingdom on June 27, 2003, roughly 5 weeks after its American debut, and immediately topped the UK box office for that weekend. Its UK opening weekend gross of $8, 3 million surpassed the previous mark set by Batman Forever for the biggest opening weekend of any Jim Carrey film in that market, indicating that Carrey's international drawing power, already well established through the 1990s via films like The Mask, Dumb and Dumber, and Batman Forever itself, remained strong going into the middle of the following decade. The film's theatrical release was not universal, however. Bruce Almighty was banned outright in several countries: Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Kuwait, and Qatar, on the grounds that its depiction of God as an ordinary man in human form was considered blasphemous under Islamic religious sensitivities in those markets. Two of the countries that initially restricted the film, Malaysia and Egypt, later lifted their bans after national censorship boards reviewed the picture and assigned it their highest available content rating rather than continuing an outright prohibition. In Malaysia's case, this took the form of an 18PL classification, a rating restricting the film to adult audiences rather than removing it from release entirely. This pattern of religious and cultural sensitivity around the film's premise, a comedy that treats the nature of God, prayer, and divine power with an irreverent, populist touch, illustrate how a concept designed to appeal broadly to largely Christian influenced Western audiences could run into very different reception in markets governed by different religious norms. A curious footnote to the film's theatrical release involved its handling of a phone number. In the story, God contacts Bruce using a telephone number that was not one of the standard fictional 555 prefix numbers Hollywood productions typically use specifically to avoid connecting audiences to real working telephone lines. because the number used in the theatrical cut was an actual dialable number. A range of real people and organizations who happened to hold that number in their own regions began receiving enormous volumes of phone calls from audience members hoping to reach God. Those affected included a church in North Carolina, coincidentally led by a minister also named Bruce, a woman in Florida who was reportedly upset enough by the volume of calls that she threatened legal action against Universal Pictures, a pastor in northern Wisconsin, and the operator of a sandwich shop in Manchester, England, who found himself fielding calls intended for the Almighty rather than for lunch orders. According to the filmmakers, the specific number used, 776-2323, was confirmed as unused within the fictional area code depicted in the story itself, area code 766, the real area code for Buffalo. Though it was never explicitly stated on screen, but the production had not checked whether the same 7-digit combination was active in other area codes around the country and abroad, which is how audience members in unrelated regions ended up dialing real numbers. In response to the public confusion, the number was changed to the standard fictional prefix 5550123 for the film's subsequent home video and television broadcast versions. Home media Bruce Almighty arrived on home video on November 25, 2003, roughly 6 months after its theatrical debut, released on both DVD and VHS by Universal Studios Home Video. This dual format release was standard practice in late 2003, a transitional period during which DVD had become the dominant and fastest growing home video format, but VHS remained a meaningful part of the market, particularly among consumers who had not yet upgraded their home playback equipment. The November release date placed the film's home video debut squarely within the pre holiday shopping season, a scheduling decision commonly used by studios to maximize retail sales of successful theatrical releases as gift purchases. The DVD edition of the film was produced with separate widescreen and full screen versions, catering to the format preferences and television equipment still common among consumers at the time. Many households in 2003 continued to own older non widescreen television sets, and studios frequently issued both aspect ratio versions of major releases to serve that market alongside the growing base of widescreen capable households. The DVD also included both Dolby Digital and DTS audio tracks, offering audiences a choice between the two competing surround sound formats that were standard across the home theater industry at the time. The film was later reissued on Blu ray, as that high definition format became the industry standard for physical home media in the years following the format's establishment. Reception box office Bruce Almighty opened to considerably stronger commercial results than even an established star vehicle for Jim Carrey might typically have projected. The film earned $67, 9 million during its opening weekend in the United States, a figure that made it the highest opening weekend of any Jim Carrey film to that point in his career, surpassing the previous benchmark set by How the Grinch Stole Christmas in 2000. That record for Carrey's career would stand for nearly 2 decades, ultimately being surpassed only with the opening of Sonic the Hedgehog 2 in 2022, a film in which Carrey co starred as the villain Dr. Robotnik rather than as the lead, illustrating just how durable Bruce Almighty's opening weekend figure proved to be within the specific context of Carrey's filmography. The film's opening also placed it among an elite tier of 2003 releases for Universal Pictures specifically. It was one of 3 Universal films that year to cross the $50 million opening weekend threshold, joining Too Fast, Too Furious and Hulk, a notable cluster of blockbuster level openings for a single studio within one summer season, reflecting a particularly strong period for Universal's theatrical slate that year. Because Bruce Almighty opened over the Memorial Day holiday weekend, its performance is also typically measured across the extended 4-day frame rather than the standard 3-day weekend alone. Over those 4 days, the film generated a total of $86.4 million, which stood as the second highest Memorial Day weekend debut in box office history at the time, trailing only The Lost World, Jurassic Park. The film opened in the number one position at the North American box office. a result that was treated as something of an upset by industry analysts since it meant Bruce Almighty outperformed The Matrix Reloaded, a heavily anticipated sequel to one of the defining blockbusters of the previous few years, which had opened just 1 week earlier and had been expected to dominate the marketplace for a longer stretch. The film's run at the top of the box office did not last long, however. In its second weekend, Bruce Almighty was dethroned by Pixar's Finding Nemo, with Bruce Almighty's gross declining by 45.1% to $37. 3 million, a substantial but not unusual drop off for a major studio comedy facing a new, heavily marketed family animation competitor in its second frame. Over the course of its full theatrical run, Bruce Almighty became part of a notable milestone for the 2003 summer movie season as a whole, along with The Matrix Reloaded, Finding Nemo, X2, and Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. It was one of the first five films to individually cross $200 million in box office revenue within a single summer season, a benchmark that industry commentators at the time cited as evidence of just how large the aggregate summer box office had grown by the early 2000s. By the close of its theatrical run, Bruce Almighty had earned $242 million domestically and $484 million worldwide, figures that made it the fifth highest grossing film of 2003 overall. It was also, at the time of its release and for many years afterward, the highest grossing film in the careers of both of its two lead stars, Jim Carrey and Jennifer Aniston, reflecting how significant a commercial achievement the picture represented for each of them individually, beyond its standing within the broader marketplace. Carrey's own box office record, set by the film, endured until March 2025, when it was finally surpassed by Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Critical response. Critical reaction to Bruce Almighty upon its release was in aggregate decidedly mixed rather than uniformly positive or negative. On the review aggregation site Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an approval rating of 48% based on 191 collected reviews, with an average rating of 5.7 out of 10, a figure that places it almost exactly at the midpoint between broad critical acceptance and rejection, reflecting a genuinely divided critical community rather than consensus in either direction. The site's own critical summary characterizes the film as one in which Carrey's slapstick comedic set pieces land well, while the film's broader narrative becomes weighed down by an excess of sentimentality in its back half. On Metacritic, which aggregates critic reviews into a weighted numerical score, Bruce Almighty received a score of 46 out of 100 based on 35 critics, a figure the site itself classifies as indicating mixed or average reviews, corroborating the divided picture painted by the Rotten Tomatoes aggregate. Audience reaction, by contrast, skewed considerably more positive than the critical consensus. CinemaScore, a market research firm that surveys opening weekend theatrical audiences and assigns films a letter grade based on their immediate reactions, recorded an average grade of A for Bruce Almighty on its A plus to F scale, a strong result indicating that general movie-going audiences responded considerably more warmly to the film in the moment than professional critics did on balance. This divergence between critical and audience response is a recurring pattern for broad studio comedies built around a bankable star's established persona. Critics often evaluate such films against narrative or thematic ambition, while general audiences frequently respond primarily to the immediate entertainment value of a beloved performer working within a familiar, crowd pleasing framework. Individual reviews from major outlets at the time of release illustrate the range of critical opinion that produced this mixed aggregate picture. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times gave the film a notably positive 3 out of 4 stars, describing it as a charming picture built around the idea that although Bruce may prove unsuited to being God, the experience ultimately makes him a better local television reporter. Ebert was also complimentary toward Jennifer Aniston's performance, specifically, suggesting that her work in the film, following her earlier performance in The Good Girl, confirmed her ability to sustain a career in film beyond her television work. Other major critics were considerably less enthusiastic. Variety's Robert Kohler offered a more mixed to negative assessment, arguing that the film failed to make much of a premise that, in his view, had considerable inherent comic potential, situating it among a broader pattern of what he characterized as under-realized high-concept studio comedies. The Los Angeles Times published an outright negative review of the picture, summarizing its overall judgment of the film with the dismissive phrase that it was not so mighty, a formulation that plays directly off the film's own title to signal the reviewer's disappointment with the final product. Beyond straightforward positive or negative assessments, some critics engaged more specifically with the film's thematic and structural choices. Chuck Rudolph, writing for Slant magazine, drew an explicit comparison between Bruce Almighty and Carrey's earlier, more critically acclaimed film, The Truman Show, arguing that Bruce Almighty functioned as a less energetic, less committed reworking of similar thematic territory. The idea of an ordinary man discovering that a higher power is shaping and observing the reality around him, with Carrie effectively occupying both the observed and observer roles that had been split between two separate characters, Truman and Christoph, in the earlier film. This kind of comparative critical framing was common in reviews of Bruce Almighty, since Curry's prior collaboration with director Peter Weir on The Truman Show had established a benchmark for how a large scale studio comedy could incorporate genuinely substantial ideas about faith, agency, and observation without sacrificing mainstream accessibility, a bar against which Bruce Almighty's more conventional, broadly comic treatment of related themes was frequently measured and, in the eyes of critics like Rudolph, found comparatively lacking in ambition. Despite this mixed and often contentious critical reception, Bruce Almighty went on to receive a range of industry and audience voted award recognitions in the year following its release, reflecting the gap that frequently exists between critical evaluation and broader industry or popular recognition for a genuinely commercially dominant film. Morgan Freeman received nominations and wins across several ceremonies for his supporting performance as God, including a win at the NAACP Image Awards for Outstanding Supporting Actor in a Motion Picture and a nomination at the BET Comedy Awards. Jim Carrey collected recognition at several youth and popular vote oriented ceremonies, including a win at the Teen Choice Awards for Choice Movie Actor in the comedy category and a win for Favorite Movie Actor at the Nickelodeon Kids' Choice Awards, alongside a nomination for Best Comedic Performance at the MTV Movie and TV Awards. The film itself won Favorite Comedy Motion Picture at the People's Choice Awards, an accolade determined by public vote rather than critical panel, further underscoring the disconnect between the film's relatively lukewarm critical standing and its considerable popularity among mainstream audiences during its theatrical run and in the months that followed.